I walked into my son's kitchen and found my grandchildren drinking hot water mixed with ketchup. They called it tomato soup. Their hollow cheeks and dark circles told the real story. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed. My son was live on Instagram, popping champagne at the city's most expensive steakhouse, shouting about the grind while his children drank red water. I didn't scream. I activated the part of my brain that had sent CEOs to prison. Please drop your name and where you are watching from in the comments below, because subscribers sometimes appear as characters in my stories. My name is Regina Thorne, and I am 68 years old. I spent 4 decades as a forensic accountant, the kind of person corporations hire when they suspect someone is stealing from them. I have sent CEOs to prison for embezzlement, and I have traced money through shell companies across 12 different countries. Numbers have always told mysteries that words try to hide. And on that gray Tuesday afternoon, the numbers in my son's life were screaming. I arrived at the house without warning. The house that I had purchased for Julian and his family 3 years ago, when my daughter-in-law Veda was still alive. The school had called me that morning with news that made my blood run cold. Little Leo, my 7-year-old grandson, had fainted during gym class, and the nurse said it was severe low blood sugar. Her voice held a note of suspicion that I recognized immediately, the tone of someone who suspects abuse but cannot prove it yet. Julian hadn't answered my calls in 3 days, which was unusual because he always answered when he needed money. I pulled into the driveway and immediately noticed that something was wrong with the property. The lawn hadn't been mowed in weeks, and brown patches of dead grass spread across what used to be a pristine yard. The mailbox was overflowing with envelopes, many of them the bright red color of final notices and collection warnings. A child's bicycle lay rusted and forgotten on the front porch, exactly where I had seen it 2 months ago during my last visit. I keyed into the front door and the lock clicked with a heavy, expensive sound that I had paid for along with every other thing in this house. But stepping inside, the air felt wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. It didn't smell like a home where children lived and laughed and played. It smelled like stale pizza boxes, unwashed laundry piled in corners, and the sharp chemical sweetness of cheap vape smoke. "Julian!" I called out, but only silence answered me. The living room was dark because the curtains had been drawn tight against the afternoon sun, and I noticed immediately that the 60-inch television I had bought for the kids was gone. The antique side table that had belonged to my mother was also missing, along with the brass floor lamp and the framed artwork that used to hang above the fireplace. My chest tightened as I began to understand what had happened to these items. I walked toward the kitchen, my boots sticking slightly to the linoleum floor with each step. And that is where I found them. Leo, 7 years old, and Mia, 5, were sitting at the kitchen island with their small bodies huddled together in their winter coats. The house was freezing cold, and when I glanced at the thermostat on the wall, the display was completely blank. The power had been cut to everything except the emergency circuits, which meant no heat, no hot water, and no working appliances. "Grandma?" Leo whispered, and his eyes looked far too big for his thin, pale face. Dark circles sat under those eyes like bruises, and his cheekbones were sharper than I remembered them being. "What are you two doing, babies?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "We're having dinner," Mia chirped, though her voice was raspy and weak from dehydration. "Daddy said if we're good and eat all our soup, he'll bring us a surprise when he comes home tonight." I looked into their mugs and felt the world tilt on its axis beneath my feet. It was hot water from the tap, and swirling in it were red clumps of ketchup squeezed from fast food packets. There was no bread on the table, no vegetables, no protein, nothing but condiment water that these children were calling tomato soup. Mia lifted her mug to show me with innocent pride. "See, Grandma? I made it myself. You put the red stuff in the hot water and stir it really fast." "Where is your father?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain calm so I wouldn't frighten them. "He went to work," Leo said, looking down at his mug with the resigned expression of a child who has learned not to complain. He said he has to entertain clients tonight because that's how you make the big money. He paused and added, he said we have to be tough. He said hungry tigers hunt better than fat ones. Hungry tigers hunt better. My son was starving my grandchildren and calling it a life lesson about success. I walked to the refrigerator and opened the door, already knowing what I would find inside. It was a white, humming coffin of emptiness. A single lemon sat on the middle shelf, withered and hard as a small rock. And beside it was a half-empty case of imported beer. No milk for growing bones, no eggs for protein, no cheese or vegetables or fruit or anything that children need to survive. I closed the door gently, though every fiber of my being wanted to rip it off its hinges and throw it through the window. "Come here, both of you," I said, and I ushered them into the living room and wrapped them in my wool coat. I went to my purse and pulled out the emergency granola bars I always kept there, along with a package of peanut butter crackers and 2 bottles of water. They ate with a ferocity that shattered my heart into 1,000 pieces. They didn't chew their food. They inhaled it like starving animals, cramming crackers into their mouths with both hands. Mia started crying halfway through her second granola bar, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sensation of actually having food in her stomach. While they ate, my phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out to check the notification. Instagram was telling me that Julian_lifestyle_king was live right now, and curiosity mixed with dread as I tapped the screen. The image that appeared was crystal clear in high definition, all bright lights and gleaming surfaces and conspicuous consumption. Julian was sitting in a red leather booth at the Prime Cut, which was the most expensive steakhouse in the entire city. He was wearing a suit that I knew cost $2,000, because I had paid the credit card bill for it just last month. "Yo, what's up, guys?" he was saying to the camera, flashing a blindingly white smile at his audience. "Just closing another massive deal tonight. You gotta spend money to make money, right? That's the law of attraction in action." He panned the camera down to show his meal, and I watched as the image revealed a tomahawk ribeye steak glistening with melted butter. There were truffle fries arranged artfully on a side plate, and a bucket of ice held a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne. "My kids are my motivation," he said, looking deep into the camera lens with practiced sincerity. "Everything I do for them." Building the legacy, building the brand. Building the Thorne empire, one deal at a time. I looked at the screen showing my son celebrating his imaginary success with champagne and steak. Then I looked at Leo, who was carefully licking a crumb of granola off his thumb so as not to waste a single bit of food. Something fundamental shifted inside me in that moment. Something that could never be shifted back. Regina, the mother, the woman who had made excuses for Julian's failures and funded his dreams, took her last breath. Regina, the auditor, the woman who had sent corrupt executives to prison cells, opened her eyes and began to see clearly. I didn't call my son to confront him, and I didn't comment on his live stream to embarrass him. I screen recorded the entire video, every second of his champagne toast and his steak dinner, and his speech about building a legacy. I saved the recording to my cloud drive under a new folder that I named simply Evidence. "Grandma, are you okay?" Mia asked, looking up at me with her mother's eyes. "I'm perfectly fine, sweetie," I said, and my voice came out as cold and hard as surgical steel. "I'm just doing some math in my head. Grandma's very good at math." I spent the next hour making them real food that would actually nourish their starving bodies. I found a camping stove in the garage and heated up cans of chicken soup that I bought from the corner store 3 blocks away. I made them peanut butter sandwiches on fresh bread and peeled oranges and poured glasses of cold milk. I watched them eat until their bellies were finally full and their eyelids grew heavy with exhaustion. I put them to bed at the hotel where I was staying, leaving them with a babysitter I trusted with my life, a retired nurse named Dorothy, who had worked with me for 20 years. Then I drove back to the house that I owned, the house where my son played at being successful while his children starved. It was time to follow the money. I parked my car down the street and walked back to the house in the darkness, letting myself in with my key. I sat in the armchair in the pitch-black living room and waited for my son to come home. Julian didn't arrive until 3 o'clock in the morning, and I heard his key fumbling clumsily in the lock for a full minute before he managed to open the door. He stumbled inside, smelling of expensive cologne layered over stale alcohol and cigarette smoke. He flicked the light switch, but of course nothing happened because the electricity had been cut off. "Damn it," he muttered to himself. "Forgot to pay that stupid bill again." He used his phone flashlight to navigate through the dark house, and the beam of light landed directly on me, sitting motionless in the armchair. He jumped backward and dropped his keys with a loud clatter on the hardwood floor. "Jesus Christ, Ma, you scared the hell out of me." He clutched his chest dramatically, then quickly composed himself and put on that slick salesman mask that I had grown to despise. "What are you doing here at this hour? I was literally just about to call you tomorrow." "To ask me for money?" I asked, keeping my voice completely flat and emotionless. "No." "Well, maybe a small bridge loan. Just a temporary cash flow issue. You know how it is in business." He waved his hand dismissively, as if the problem were merely a minor inconvenience. The big clients pay net 60 these days, so sometimes you have to float expenses for a couple months. "I saw the children tonight, Julian." He paused for just a microsecond, and I watched his salesman smile falter before snapping back into place. "Oh yeah? They're sleeping now, right?" "Good kids. Very disciplined. I'm teaching them about delayed gratification." They were drinking ketchup mixed with hot water and calling it tomato soup, Julian. He waved his hand again with an exaggerated gesture of dismissal. "You're exaggerating as usual, Ma. It's actually a biohack that I read about online." His voice took on the condescending tone of someone explaining something obvious to a slow child. Intermittent fasting boosts growth hormones in children. It makes them sharper and more focused. All the top performers do it. "They are 7 and 5 years old," he said, my voice still flat despite the fire burning in my chest. "They are not biohackers or top performers. They are hungry children who fainted at school from low blood sugar." Julian sighed heavily and rolled his eyes as if I were a nagging child who simply couldn't understand the modern world. "Ma, you don't get the new economy. I'm building a personal brand here, and perception is reality." He gestured around the dark house as if it were a palace instead of a foreclosed shell. "If I look poor, I attract poor energy, and I stay poor forever. But if I eat steak and drink champagne, I attract steak and champagne money." He smiled at me with genuine belief in his own nonsense. "It's called manifestation. It's an investment in my future success." "And the electricity that's been cut off?" I asked. "Is that also a manifestation strategy?" "An oversight," he said quickly. "My assistant forgot to pay the bill this month." "You don't have an assistant, Julian. You've never had an assistant." "I'm in the process of hiring one," he shouted, his mask slipping into sudden aggression. "Why are you always attacking me and criticizing everything I do? I'm a single dad doing my absolute best here." He stepped toward me with his finger pointed at my face. "Do you have any idea how hard it is to raise 2 kids alone since Veda passed away? Do you know what I've sacrificed?" He knew exactly which button to press to make me retreat. Veda, my sweet daughter-in-law, who had passed away 2 years ago from cancer that took her in just 3 months. Since her death, I had given Julian everything he asked for, out of a mixture of guilt and grief and desperate hope. But tonight, that button didn't work anymore. "I'm tired, Ma," he said, turning away from me with theatrical exhaustion. "Get out of my house. I have a huge meeting tomorrow." "Your house?" I asked softly, and something in my tone made him turn back to look at me. "Yeah, my house. The one you gave me and Veda." He said it with the absolute certainty of someone who has never read a legal document in his life. "Right," I said, standing up slowly from the armchair. "Sleep well, Julian. You're going to need your rest." I walked out of the house and got into my car, but I did not drive to the hotel where the children were sleeping. I parked around the corner, opened my laptop, and connected to the neighbor's Wi-Fi network, which I also paid for because I had set it up for them 2 years ago. I had administrator access to Julian's entire home computer network because I was the one who had installed it and configured all the passwords. I bypassed his weak security measures, noting that his password was simply his own birthday, and accessed his cloud-based accounting software. Julian called himself a business consultant, so he kept financial records. They were bad records, sloppy and disorganized, but they were records nonetheless, and records tell stories. I began my forensic audit at 4 o'clock in the morning, and the numbers immediately started revealing a horror story. I found the monthly deposit of $5,000 that I sent him every month for what I believed was the children's education and nutrition. I traced the transfer from my account to his, and then I followed it further into the darkness. The money didn't go to the private school where Leo was supposed to be enrolled. It didn't go to grocery stores, or pediatricians, or tutoring services, or anything related to childcare. Instead, it flowed directly into a shell company that Julian had created called Prestige Consulting LLC. From there, the money flowed outward like a river of sewage into a dozen different cesspools. $1,200 went to a place called the Sapphire Club, labeled in his books as client entertainment expenses. $800 went to Balenciaga, labeled as uniforms for professional appearances. $2,500 every month went to a luxury auto leasing company, labeled as essential business transportation. That was the Range Rover he parked in the driveway while his children sat in the dark without electricity. And then I found the entry that made me want to reach through the screen and strangle my own son. A withdrawal of $15,000 from the emergency fund I had set up specifically for the children's healthcare needs. The memo line said, "Leo's dental surgery, urgent." I checked the date of that withdrawal and cross-referenced it with Julian's social media posts. That was the exact week he had flown to Miami with 3 of his friends for what he called a networking retreat. I had seen the photos of them on IOT, holding champagne bottles, surrounded by women in bikinis. Leo still had all of his baby teeth, and he had never needed dental surgery of any kind. My son had stolen from his own child's health fund to finance a party vacation with his friends. I printed everything I found, every spreadsheet, every receipt, every transfer, every lie documented in black and white. By the time the sun began to rise over the city, I had a stack of paper an inch thick sitting on my passenger seat. It was enough evidence to put Julian in federal prison for fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. But prison alone wasn't enough for what he had done to those children. He needed to be completely dismantled, stripped of the one thing he valued more than his own family, his precious reputation. I needed a plan that would destroy his credit, his name, and his future, all while remaining completely legal and devastatingly public. I picked up my phone and called an old friend named Arthur Sterling. Arthur was a venture capitalist, a billionaire many times over, and he owed me a significant favor. Years ago, I had caught his CFO stealing $12 million through a complex web of shell companies and fraudulent invoices. My forensic work had saved Arthur's fund and sent the thief to prison for 15 years. "Regina?" he answered on the first ring, despite the early hour. "It's been too long." "Arthur, I need a shark," I said, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and red. "I have a target for you. He's greedy, stupid, and desperate for validation. The perfect mark." "Who is it?" Arthur asked, with the calm curiosity of a predator sensing prey. "My son," I replied, and there was a long pause on the line. "Tell me exactly what you need," Arthur said finally, "and consider it done." The plan was elegant in its simplicity, and I called it the Trojan horse. We would offer Julian exactly what he had always wanted: a shortcut to the big leagues, a chance to play with the real players. 2 days later, I invited Julian to lunch at an upscale restaurant downtown. I apologized for my harsh words during our midnight confrontation, and I told him that I was simply old-fashioned and didn't understand the influencer economy. "I want to support your dream," I said, forcing my face into an expression of maternal warmth. I spoke to a connection of mine, a man named Arthur Sterling. Perhaps you've heard of him. Julian's eyes went wide, and I could practically see dollar signs replacing his pupils. Sterling? The tech investor? The guy who funded 3 unicorn startups? Ma, are you serious right now? He's looking for a lifestyle brand to invest in, I continued, maintaining my pleasant grandmother façade. Something authentic, with a strong personal narrative. I showed him your social media presence. Julian was practically vibrating with excitement, his coffee forgotten and growing cold. And? What did he say? Is he interested? He's willing to invest $500,000 in your brand, I said, and I watched my son's face transform with naked greed. But he needs to see what he calls skin in the game. He needs you to match his investment at 20%. Julian's face fell slightly as he did the math. $100,000? Ma, I don't have that kind of liquidity right now. I can't simply give it to you, I said firmly. Arthur verifies the source of all investment funds. It has to come from your own assets. I leaned forward and looked into his eyes. It has to prove that you believe in yourself. I watched the gears turning in his head, watched greed battle against caution, and watched greed win by a landslide. I can make it happen, he whispered, more to himself than to me. I can get the money. Give me 1 week. Arthur is leaving the country in 10 days, I said. The window is closing fast. Julian stood up from the table without finishing his meal. I'll have the money. Tell Sterling to get the contracts ready. This is going to be huge. He walked out of the restaurant already typing furiously on his phone, and I sat alone at the table and allowed myself one small, cold smile. The next week was a blur of self-destruction that I observed from a careful distance. Julian began cannibalizing his own life to raise the $100,000 he believed would make him a mogul. He sold the furniture that I hadn't noticed was already missing from the house. He pawned the Rolex watch that I had given him as a wedding gift when he married Veda. He sold the children's bicycles, their video game console, and the bedroom furniture from the guest room. But it still wasn't enough money, and I watched his desperation grow with each passing day. Then the alert came through on the title monitoring service I had placed on the house 2 years ago. Julian was taking out a second mortgage from a predatory lender, leveraging the roof over his children's heads at a 25% interest rate. He was risking everything, including his children's home, for a chance to impress a billionaire who was working with me to destroy him. But the final straw came on Thursday afternoon, 6 days before the scheduled meeting with Arthur. I was visiting the children at the house, bringing groceries as I had done every day since the ketchup soup incident. Leo and Mia were in the kitchen eating sandwiches when I heard a noise from the master bedroom. I walked down the hallway and stopped in the doorway, my phone already recording. Julian was on his knees in front of the closet, digging through Veda's jewelry box. These were the pieces that Veda had wanted her children to have, the heirlooms she had spoken about during her final weeks. He pulled out a sapphire necklace, the deep blue stone catching the light as it dangled from his fingers. That necklace had belonged to Veda's grandmother, and Veda had made me promise that Mia would wear it on her wedding day. "Daddy, no!" Mia had appeared in the doorway behind me, and she ran into the room with her small fists clenched. "Mommy said that's mine. She promised it to me before she went to heaven." Julian didn't comfort his daughter or explain his actions with gentle words. He shoved her away from him, nothing enough to leave a bruise, but hard enough to show that he didn't care about her tears. "Shut up, you little brat," he hissed. "I'm doing this for us. I'll buy you 10 necklaces when this deal closes." He stuffed the sapphire necklace into his jacket pocket and turned to see me standing in the doorway. For just a moment, something like shame flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by the defiant arrogance I had come to know so well. "Back off, Ma," he snapped. "I'm making a play here. You'll thank me when I'm a millionaire." "Julian," I said calmly, keeping my voice steady despite the fury burning through my veins. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he said, pushing past me and walking out of the house. I stood in the empty bedroom and saved the video to my cloud folder. I labeled it Exhibit B, Emotional Abuse and Theft of Deceased Mother's Property. Then I knelt down and gathered Mia into my arms as she sobbed. A memory surfaced unbidden, sharp and painful, from Veda's funeral 2 years ago. Julian had stood before her casket, his shoulders shaking with genuine grief, tears streaming down his face. He had gathered both children into his arms and held them tight against his chest. "I'm going to protect you," he had promised them, his voice cracking with emotion. "I'm going to take care of you forever. Mommy is watching us from heaven, and I won't let her down." I had believed him that day, believed that grief would transform him into the father his children needed. I didn't know when the transformation had reversed, when the promising had become lying, and the protecting had become neglecting. Perhaps the man who cried at that funeral had been genuine, and something inside him had broken in the years since. Or perhaps he had always been capable of this cruelty, and I had simply refused to see it. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. The son I had loved was gone, replaced by a predator who fed on his own children, and predators needed to be stopped. The day of the signing arrived on a bright, clear morning that felt completely wrong for what was about to happen. We met in Arthur Sterling's glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor of a downtown tower. The city stretched out below us in miniature, and Julian was practically bouncing with manic energy. "This is it, Ma," he said, his eyes wild and gleaming. "This is where everything changes." He was wearing a suit he couldn't afford, and his hands trembled slightly as he placed a cashier's check on the mahogany table. $100,000. Every cent he could scrape together from selling furniture, pawning jewelry, mortgaging his children's home, and stealing from his late wife's memory. Arthur picked up the check and examined it with the cool, dispassionate expression of a surgeon examining an X-ray. "You understand the terms of this investment, Mr. Thorne?" Arthur asked. "This money goes into an escrow account controlled by a neutral third party. If you fail to meet the key performance indicators outlined in the contract, the funds remain locked." "I never fail," Julian said with a grin that showed too many teeth. "Failure isn't in my vocabulary." He grabbed the pen and signed the contract without reading a single word of the fine print. The fine print that I had personally drafted with Arthur's legal team. The clause that named the escrow agent as having full discretion to freeze all funds upon any suspicion of financial impropriety. The escrow agent was me. "Done," Arthur said, shaking Julian's hand with a grip that was just slightly too firm. "Congratulations, Mr. Thorne. You're officially in business with Sterling Capital." Julian stood up from the table, his chest puffed out like a rooster who had just conquered the henhouse. "I'm going to throw a launch party tonight," he announced to the room. "I'm going to live stream the whole thing. The birth of the Thorne Empire, broadcast to the entire world." "I'll be watching," I said, and I meant every word. That evening, Julian's house was filled with strangers who had appeared out of nowhere to celebrate his success. Models, wannabe rappers, social media influencers, and assorted hangers-on drinking the liquor he had bought on credit. Music was blasting from rented speakers, and the house I had purchased was being used as a backdrop for his delusions. He started the live stream at exactly 9 o'clock, standing in the middle of his living room with his arms spread wide. "We made it, baby," he screamed into the camera, holding a stack of cash that was almost certainly prop money. 6 figures invested, Sterling Capital backed. We are absolutely untouchable now. The comments were rolling in from his followers, hundreds of people cheering on his imaginary success. "King shit," someone wrote. "Told you he was going to make it." "Investment goals," wrote another. This is what manifestation looks like. I sat in my car outside the house, watching the live stream on my tablet. Next to me sat Agent Miller from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, a woman I had worked with on 3 previous cases. Behind us was a van from Child Protective Services, and behind that was a second vehicle containing 2 federal marshals. "Is that him?" Agent Miller asked, watching Julian dance on the screen. "That's him," I confirmed. "And you received the complete forensic audit this morning?" "We did. Tax evasion, wire fraud, misappropriation of trust funds, and potentially child endangerment." She looked at me with something like sympathy in her professional eyes. "I'm sorry it has to be this way, Regina." "I'm not," I said, and I meant it. "Let's go." I watched the live stream as the raid unfolded in real time, the viewer's perspective captured perfectly by the phone Julian had propped on a shelf. He was in the middle of a speech about hustle culture and the importance of betting on yourself, when a thunderous crash echoed through the audio. The front door burst inward, and suddenly the frame was filled with agents in tactical vests. "Federal agents! Nobody move! Hands where we can see them!" The camera shook violently as Julian stumbled backward and knocked his phone to the ground. It landed face up on the hardwood floor, filming nothing but the ceiling and the disco ball he had rented. But the audio was absolutely perfect. "Julian Thorne, you are under arrest for tax evasion, wire fraud, and child endangerment. You have the right to remain silent." "What? No! This is a mistake. You have the wrong guy." Julian's voice was cracking with panic, all traces of his confident persona completely gone. "My mom is Regina Thorne, the forensic accountant. Call her. She'll tell you this is all a misunderstanding." "We know exactly who your mother is," Agent Miller's voice boomed through the speaker. "She's the one who filed the report." The live stream chat exploded with comments scrolling faster than anyone could read. LOL, did he just get raided on his own stream? His mom turned him in? That's the most savage thing I've ever seen. Scammer, I knew this guy was fake. Bro is absolutely cooked. Prison speedrun any %. I stepped out of my car and walked slowly toward the house, my heels clicking on the pavement. The music had been silenced, and the party guests were being lined up against the walls for identification. Julian was lying face down on the hardwood floor with his hands cuffed behind his back and an agent's knee pressed into his spine. He twisted his head and saw me walking through the doorway. His eyes were wide with shock, betrayal, and a desperate, childlike confusion. "Ma, tell them! Tell them it's a me understanding! Tell them I'm your son!" I walked across the room and stood over him, looking down at the boy I had raised, the man I had funded, the predator I had finally stopped. "It's not a misunderstanding, Julian," I said, my voice clear and steady. "It's an audit, and you failed." The CPS worker, a kind woman named Sarah, who I had briefed thoroughly beforehand, was already upstairs with the children. She brought them down the back stairs, shielding their eyes from the sight of their father in handcuffs on the floor. "Grandma!" Leo cried out when he saw me, and he broke free from Sarah's hand and ran across the room. I fell to my knees and caught both children in my arms, pulling them tight against my chest. "It's over," I whispered into their hair, breathing in their smell and feeling their hearts beat against mine. "You're safe now. You're never going to be hungry again. Not while I'm still breathing." Julian was screaming as the agents dragged him toward the door and out into the waiting night. "You ruined me. You planned this whole thing from the start. That money was mine." "That money," I called out, standing up with my grandchildren still holding my hands, "is now in a trust fund for your children. Read the contract, Julian. Section 4, paragraph 2. He disappeared into the back of the police car, and the door slammed shut on his screaming. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. The legal battle that followed was short and brutal, exactly as I had designed it to be. My forensic report was completely bulletproof. Every transaction traced, every lie documented, every dollar accounted for. The judge reviewed the evidence for 3 days and then delivered his verdict. He looked at Julian standing before him in his orange jumpsuit, still trying to argue that he was a me-understood content creator. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, peering over his glasses with contempt, "you didn't create content. You created a crime scene." Julian was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for fraud and tax evasion. His parental rights were terminated immediately and permanently. I was granted full custody of both children, legally and irrevocably. The house was seized by the bank to pay back the fraudulent mortgages, but I didn't care about the house. I cared about Veda's jewelry, which I tracked down and purchased back from the pawn shop before it could be sold to strangers. The sapphire necklace now rests in a safe deposit box at my bank, waiting for Mia's wedding day. 6 months have passed since that night, and our lives have found a new rhythm. We live in my house now, a sturdy brick colonial with a big backyard garden and a kitchen that always smells like cooking. The refrigerator is always full, and the thermostat is always set to a comfortable 72 degrees. I am sitting on the front porch on an autumn afternoon, watching Leo and Mia play tag in the fallen leaves. Leo has gained 10 pounds since coming to live with me, and his cheeks have turned rosy with health and happiness. Mia laughs with a sound like ringing bells, no longer raspy from dehydration, no longer hollow from hunger. They are children again, finally, after years of being small survivors. My phone rings inside the house, and I walk in to check the caller ID. Correctional facility. Inmate. Call blinks red on the screen. It's Julian, calling collect as he does once every week. He wants money for the commissary. He wants to apologize for what he did. He wants to explain that prison has changed him. I look at the phone blinking in my hand and think about the ketchup water in those mugs. I think about the cold, dark house and the children huddled in their winter coats. I think about Veda's sapphire necklace stuffed carelessly into his pocket. I reach out and decline the call. Then I block the number entirely. I don't hate my son, because hatred requires energy and investment that I refuse to give him. I simply have nothing left for him. My accounts with Julian Thorne are closed. My ledger is finally balanced. I walk back out to the porch and settle into my rocking chair. "Grandma," Mia shouts from across the yard. "Watch me do a cartwheel." "I'm watching, baby." I call back with a smile that comes from somewhere deep and healed. I'm always watching. If you found your grandchildren drinking ketchup soup while their father drank champagne, what would you have done? Would you have given him another chance? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Tell me what you think in the comments below. If this story about numbers saving lives and a grandmother's love resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. I share a new story every day, and I would love for you to be part of this community. Until next time, keep your fridge full and your eyes wide open.